Statement coming up here on Sky News 10:30. Right now, let's turn to the Shadow Chancellor, Ed Balls, who joins us live from Westminster. Ed Balls, very good morning to you.
Morning.
Let's assume you win, as the poll suggests. Labour wins in 49 days' time, the general election. Which bits of yesterday's budget would you retain and which bits would you discard?
Well, look, at the heart of yesterday's budget is a plan which the Office for Budget Responsibility say would mean even deeper cuts in public spending in the next 3 years compared to the last 5. And I think that is extreme. I think it's risky and dangerous. That is not what Labour will do. We'll have a balanced plan to get the deficit down in the next Parliament, to cut the budget deficit, to get the national debt falling. But that squeeze, even bigger in the next 3 years than the last 5 for police, for defence, I think in the end it will mean cuts to our National Health Service with the Tories. That kind of budget judgment, I think, is the wrong judgment for Britain, and we'll take a very different approach.
But you, as part of your spending plans, you would cut down on defence spending and police budgets, wouldn't you? NHS ring-fence for sure, but there are areas of public spending under a Labour government which would be cut.
Look, we'll have to make sensible spending cuts, and we will have some tax rises on the highest incomes for people at the top, and also we will have a focus on raising people's wages. We are going to scrap the Police and Crime Commissioner elections and save £250 million in police budgets, £500 million savings in local government, £230 million in education, in defence procurement. We've set out a whole range of issues in our zero-based review. But what the OBR says, they call it a roller coaster. They say you'd have a huge cut in the next 3 years, more severe than the last 5 years. I think that is the wrong plan. I think that will undermine our economy and public services and living standards, and our more sensible, balanced approach, very different from what the Tories and Liberal Democrats are setting out.
But he's not cutting as deeply as originally had planned. There's no plan for a £25 billion surplus come 2020. The comparison now is more with the 1960s size of state than the 1930s, which you were highly critical of. So yes, there will be austerity, but less than you expected, than all of us expected.
I actually don't think, if you look at the figures, Colin, that's true. I think 4 years out, George Osborne has suddenly said he's going to have a lower surplus. In the next 3 years, which really matters for people in our country, it's a more severe set of cuts in the last 5 years. And if you look at the numbers, if you look at the OBR's measure of day-to-day spending on public services in 2018-2019, it's actually the lowest level of public spending since 1938. Now, the Tories tried to say yesterday, no, it's not 1938, it's 1964. They say it's only the biggest cuts at the lowest level for 50 years. 50 years, 80 years. The truth is, it would put our police, our defence and our National Health Service at risk, or mean a big rise in value-added tax, which is, of course, what the Tories always do and what the Lib Dems agreed to do a few years ago. So, the idea that he's changed Tory austerity in the next few years, the figures don't bear that out at all.
Well, here in 2015, people do fret about the size of the welfare bill. George Osborne yesterday says he would cut it by £12 billion. Does that seem unreasonable to you?
Well, look, he's not set out any of the details of how he will do that. And in this Parliament, he's overspent by £25 billion.
Would you match that kind of cut to the welfare bill, Shadow Chancellor?
We will have a welfare cap, but we're going to make different choices from the Tories. I want to get the housing benefit bill down, but I think you do that by building more affordable homes. I want to get the bill down for tax credits, but you do that by having a higher minimum wage and more people earning better wages. I want to abolish the bedroom tax, which is so unfair to vulnerable people. You had Danny Alexander and George Osborne debating this morning what they've done and who's been fair and who's been unfair. The Tories and Liberal Democrats together brought in the bedroom tax, higher tuition fees for students, and that rise in VAT. These were the guys who took from the poor to give to the rich. That's the opposite of a Robin Hood budget.
And yet, if you asked a lot of people on the street and said, look, if you'd asked them 5 years ago and you'd said, project forward 5 years to 2015, given the state of the economy in 2010, and in 2015 you've got 1,000 jobs, as the Chancellor reminded us yesterday, being created every day. You've got the fastest rate of growth in an economy of all major economies in the world, interest rates at record lows, inflation at record lows. Frankly, in 2010, most people would have bitten your hand off.
Well, That's what George Osborne was trying to say yesterday in the House of Commons. But even his own backbenchers were quite subdued, because I think that sort of hubris and boasting is actually quite out of touch with the reality of people's lives. People are worse off than they were in 2010. We've got 1.8 million 0 hours contracts, lots of jobs part-time on low wages, people really struggling with higher bills. George Osborne said he'd balance the books by now. He's totally failed. He said he'd get the national debt down to the 67% of £250 billion higher. I think when you actually prod a little bit, Colin, what you find is that these boasts, they aren't real. And my experience with budgets is the Chancellor can always set out his boasts and his spin in the first few hours. But, you know, after 24, 36 hours, people stand back and say, what's really happened? And what's really happened is people are worse off, and the Tories want more extreme cuts in public spending, but they've not changed the way our economy works in a way which will make it fair for working people. That's the election choice. Nothing's changed. And I think the Tories are on the wrong side of the argument and the wrong side of history when it comes to living standards in our country.
Ed Balls, thanks very much.
Thanks, Colin.